Picture this. You're standing in a modest courtyard in rural China, watching a 5-year-old girl sitting on the edge of a wooden bed, her small feet dangling over the side. The year is 1875 AD, during the Qing dynasty, and the morning sun filters through paper windows, casting soft shadows across the room. Her mother kneels before her with trembling hands, unwrapping long strips of white cloth, while the girl's grandmother stands in the doorway, arms crossed, nodding with approval. The smell of alum powder fills the air, sharp and medicinal. The little girl doesn't understand why today feels different, why her mother's eyes glisten with unshed tears, or why those innocent feet that have carried her through countless games are about to become instruments of her imprisonment. What you're about to witness isn't just a family ritual, it's the beginning of a 70-year sentence of constant agony, all in the name of beauty. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of ancient cruelty. It's the story of how an entire civilization convinced itself that breaking little girls' bones was an act of love, how millions of mothers became torturers of their own daughters, and how a practice that started as courtly fashion became a prison for half the population. The practice of foot binding lasted for over 1,000 years, crippling somewhere between 1 billion and 3 billion women across Chinese history. And the girl sitting on that bed? She has no idea that she'll never run again, never climb another tree, never feel the simple freedom of walking without pain. Let's start with what's about to happen in this room. The mother begins with the right foot. She folds the 4 smaller toes underneath, pressing them toward the sole with a force that makes the girl gasp. The pain is immediate and sharp, unlike anything she's ever experienced. She tries to pull away, but her mother's grip is iron. "Be still," the mother whispers, and there's something in her voice, not cruelty, but something worse. Love twisted into something unrecognizable. She wraps the cloth tight, so tight that the toes feel like they might burst. Each loop of the binding pulls the foot into an unnatural arch, forcing the heel and toes closer together, compressing bones that were meant to grow, meant to support, meant to carry this child through life. The binding takes hours. By the time both feet are wrapped, the girl is sobbing, her small face flushed and streaked with tears. The grandmother nods approvingly and leaves without a word. The mother helps her daughter stand, and the moment the child's weight shifts onto those newly bound feet, she screams. It feels like walking on broken glass, like every bone is splintering. She collapses, and her mother catches her, holds her as she cries, and whispers that it will get better. She's lying, and somewhere deep down, the girl knows it. But here's what most people don't understand about foot binding. It wasn't some barbaric practice imposed by men on helpless women. The historical reality is far more disturbing. Foot binding was perpetuated almost entirely by women, on women. Mothers bound their daughters' feet. Grandmothers insisted on it. Aunts supervised the process. Women who had survived foot binding themselves became the enforcers of the practice on the next generation. Why? Because in a society where a woman's only value was her marriageability, and where marriageability required bound feet, refusing to bind your daughter's feet wasn't an act of mercy. It was a death sentence. It meant condemning her to spinsterhood, poverty, and social exile. The practice of foot binding traces its origins to the Song dynasty, somewhere between 960 and 1279 AD, though legends push it back even earlier. The story goes that Emperor Liyu's favorite concubine, Yao Niang, was a talented dancer who bound her feet into the shape of a new moon and danced on a golden lotus platform. The emperor was so captivated that the practice spread through the court like wildfire. What started as elite fashion gradually trickled down through society. By the time our 5-year-old girl is born in 1870, foot binding has become nearly universal among Han Chinese families, cutting across class lines. Even poor farming families bound their daughters' feet, despite the fact that it made them unable to work in the fields. The girl's feet throb with a pain that pulses in rhythm with her heartbeat. She can't sleep, can't find any position that brings relief. Her mother sits beside her through the dark hours, occasionally adjusting the bindings, checking for circulation. She tells her daughter stories of her own binding, how she cried too, how her mother held her just like this. The words offer no comfort. When dawn finally breaks, the girl is exhausted, feverish, and her feet have swollen against the bindings until they feel like they might explode. But there's no respite. The mother unwraps the bindings, and the girl sees her feet for the first time since yesterday. They're purple and swollen, the toes bent at impossible angles, and there's a smell, faint but distinct, of something dying. The mother soaks the feet in a mixture of hot water, herbs, animal blood, and alum. The sting is so intense the girl nearly passes out. Then her mother rebinds them, even tighter than before. The girl begs her to stop, promises to be good, promises anything if she'll just let her feet heal. The mother doesn't answer. She just pulls the cloth tighter. This becomes the routine. Every 2 days, unwrap, wash, rebind. Each time, the bindings get tighter. Each time, the bones are forced to break and reset in their new, grotesque position. The arch is forced upward, creating a deep crevice in the sole. The heel and toes are pulled closer together, compressing the foot's length until it resembles a hoof more than a human appendage. The medical reality of what's happening is horrifying. The bones in the toes are being deliberately broken through sustained pressure. As they attempt to heal, they're prevented from returning to their natural position by the constant compression. The result is a foot where the 4 smaller toes have been folded completely under, their bones fused in that bent position. The arch has collapsed upward rather than supporting weight from below. The heel and ball of the foot have been forced so close together that the foot measures only 3 to 4 inches in length. But the girl must walk. Despite the agony, despite the broken bones grinding against each other, she must learn to walk on these new feet. Her mother makes her practice daily, taking small shuffling steps around the house. Each step is torture. She develops a distinctive swaying gait that men will later describe as graceful, erotic, like a tender young willow shoot in a spring breeze. But the truth is different. She walks this way because there's no other option. Her feet can no longer support her full weight. Every step is a calculated effort to minimize pain. Months pass. The seasons change. The girl's feet begin to take their permanent shape. Some of her toes have developed infections where the nails dig into the folded flesh. The smell of decay becomes constant, masked only by herbs and perfumes applied during rebinding sessions. She watches other girls in her village go through the same process. Some die from infections that spread from their feet into their bloodstream. Others develop gangrene, their toes rotting off, which is actually considered fortunate because it makes the feet smaller. She has a cousin whose mother bound her feet too tight. The girl lost 3 toes to necrosis, and her aunt celebrated, saying her daughter would surely attract a wealthy husband now. The psychological transformation runs even deeper than the physical one. The girl begins to internalize the lessons taught during the binding sessions. Beauty is pain. A woman's value lies in her desirability to men. Her feet, these broken, twisted appendages, are now her most valuable asset. She learns to hide the pain, to smile through it, to present a serene face while her feet scream in constant agony. This dissociation becomes second nature. The splitting of internal experience from external presentation, a survival skill that will serve her for the rest of her life. By age 8, her feet have reached their final size, 3.5 inches. A respectable silver lotus. Not the perfect 3-inch golden lotus that her mother achieved, but good enough. The binding doesn't stop, though. For the rest of her life, she'll need to keep them bound to maintain their shape, to prevent them from growing or spreading. At night, she sleeps with bound feet. During the day, she wears tiny embroidered shoes, works of art that hide the horror beneath. She spends hours each week washing her feet, applying powders and perfumes to mask the smell of damaged tissue, checking for new infections. The social dynamics of foot binding reveal something profound about how oppression works. It wasn't men with weapons forcing this practice on unwilling women. It was mothers, grandmothers, aunts, women who loved their daughters, who perpetuated the system. They did it because refusing meant condemning their daughters to lives of poverty and shame. A girl with natural feet, big feet as they were called, was considered unmarriageable. No respectable family would accept her as a bride. She would be a burden to her natal family forever, or worse, forced into prostitution or servitude. This created a system where the oppressed became the oppressors, where survival demanded complicity, where love took the form of torture. Mothers who wept as they broke their daughters' bones genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They had survived the same process. They had learned that in their world, beauty meant broken feet, and broken feet meant survival. To refuse would be to admit that their own suffering had been meaningless, that the decades of pain they'd endured had been for nothing. When she turns 12, the binding process is considered complete. Her mother begins preparing her for marriage. She learns to walk with small, deliberate steps, to never let anyone see her struggle or wince. She practices sitting gracefully, standing from a seated position without support, all the movements that able-bodied people take for granted, but which require careful planning when your feet are broken. The matchmaker arrives when she's 14. The professional woman examines her like merchandise, checking her face, figure, needlework, and finally, her feet. The mother helps remove the embroidered shoes, then carefully unwraps the binding cloths. The matchmaker's face remains neutral as she measures the feet with string. 3.5 inches. Silver lotus, she confirms. Very respectable. The Wang family will be pleased. She's married at 15 to a man she's never met, the second son of a merchant family. Her dowry includes her trousseau, her needlework samples, and her silver lotus feet. The wedding is elaborate, but she remembers little except the pain of standing during the ceremony and the fear of what comes next. The wedding night reveals another disturbing aspect of foot binding, its sexual dimension. Her husband unwraps her feet with reverent hands, treating them like sacred objects. He's been socialized his entire life to find small feet beautiful, the ultimate expression of femininity. But when he sees her feet unbound and naked, there's a flicker in his eyes, disgust maybe, or shock quickly masked. Her feet are deformed. The bones are twisted, the toes folded under and partially fused, the arch unnaturally high, scarred from old infections, with that ever-present smell of damaged tissue. But he's been taught to find this beautiful, so he does, or pretends to. And she's been trained to present this broken part of herself as her greatest asset. This is intimacy in a world where women's bodies are shaped by force from childhood to fit male desire. Married life brings new challenges. She must manage a household while barely able to walk. She develops strategies, counting the exact steps between rooms, placing furniture for support, planning her days around energy levels. By evening, her feet are so swollen and painful that each step becomes monumental. Pregnancy is particularly difficult. As her body grows heavier, her feet struggle to support the weight. By the 3rd trimester, she can barely walk. Her mother-in-law, whose feet are even smaller at a perfect 3 inches, offers no sympathy. She managed through 4 pregnancies, she reminds her daughter-in-law. You should be grateful your feet aren't larger, or the pain would be worse. She gives birth to 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. When the daughter turns 5, she faces the decision that's haunted her since understanding what was done to her. It's 1895 now. Whispers of change are in the air. Foreign missionaries preach against foot binding, calling it barbaric. Progressive Chinese reformers have started anti-foot binding societies. The Qing dynasty itself seems to be wavering. But she lives in a rural province, far from coastal cities where new ideas flourish. Here, tradition still rules. Her mother-in-law expects her to bind her daughter's feet. Her husband makes it clear that an unmarried daughter with natural feet would be a family disgrace. Society demands it. She looks at her daughter's small, perfect feet, watches her run and play with a freedom she barely remembers. She thinks about the pain, the decades of constant agony, the infections, the shame hidden beneath embroidered silk. She thinks about her own mother's trembling hands as she first wrapped her feet, the love in her eyes as she inflicted this torture. And despite everything, despite knowing exactly what she's about to do, she calls her daughter inside. She sits her on the bed. She prepares the binding cloths. Because what choice does she have? In this world, a mother's love means preparing your daughter for survival, even when survival requires breaking her. The practice continues for another generation in many parts of China, despite increasing opposition. The Qing dynasty officially bans it in 1902, but enforcement is weak in rural areas. It isn't until the Republic of China forms in 1912, and later when the Communist Party takes power in 1949, that foot binding truly begins to disappear. But by then, millions of women have already had their feet bound, carrying the physical and psychological scars for life. The last foot binding survivors lived into the 21st century. In 2015, a photographer documented the remaining elderly women with lotus feet, their feet still bound because unbinding them after so many decades would be more painful than leaving them. These women, some over 100 years old, represented the last living connection to a practice that shaped Chinese society for a millennium. The medical consequences were severe and lifelong. Studies of surviving bound-foot women showed significantly higher rates of falls, hip fractures, and inability to stand without assistance. Their feet were prone to infections, ulcers, and sepsis. The practice affected not just feet, but entire skeletal structure, altering hip development, spine curvature, and overall mobility. But perhaps the most profound impact was psychological. Foot binding created a society where women's suffering was normalized, where pain became beauty, where the mutilation of girls' bodies was an act of maternal love. It taught women to value themselves based on male desire, to hide physical reality beneath artifice, to smile through constant pain. These lessons persisted long after the bindings came off. Our protagonist lives to see the practice end. In 1902, when the Qing ban is issued, she's 32, and her daughter's feet have been bound for 7 years. The ban means nothing in her village. It comes too late for her family, but she watches younger girls grow up with natural feet, and she feels a complicated mixture of relief and resentment. They'll never know her pain, but they'll also never understand what she sacrificed, what she survived. In old age, confined to her bed because her feet can no longer support her weight, she reflects on the golden lotus ideal, the 3-inch perfection that ruined so many lives. She thinks about the chain of suffering stretching across centuries, how a courtly fashion became a prison for millions, how beauty standards weaponized women's bodies. Her feet, wrapped always in their bindings, ache with pain that's been her constant companion for 70 years. She's never known a day without it. Even in dreams, she walks with the lotus gait, feeling familiar agony with each step. Her bound feet defined her life, determined her marriage, limited her movements, shaped her world. They were supposed to make her beautiful, desirable, valuable. Instead, they made her broken. As she drifts towards sleep on an autumn evening in 1940, she hears her great-granddaughter running through the courtyard, natural feet carrying her freely over stones. The girl will grow up in a world where foot binding is history, a barbaric practice from the past. She'll never understand what it meant to be a woman in this time, never comprehend the weight of beauty standards requiring broken bones, never know the courage it took to smile through decades of agony. The story, like millions of others, will be forgotten, lost except in fragmentary records and museum displays. The embroidered lotus shoes that once held broken feet will be displayed as historical fashion, their true meaning sanitized and distant. The pain, the daily struggle, the psychological toll, these leave no artifacts, create no museum displays. But in this moment, as sun sets and shadows lengthen, this story matters. One woman among millions, but she survived. She endured pain that would break most people, navigated a world that valued her suffering as beauty, and emerged with her humanity intact. Her broken feet carried her through life, but never carried away her dignity. The golden lotus, it turns out, was never golden. It was painted red with little girls' blood, perfumed to hide rotting tissue, wrapped in silk to conceal broken bones. It was a lie an entire civilization told itself for 1,000 years, a collective delusion that beauty could be carved from agony, that women's worth could be measured in inches, that love could take the form of mother breaking daughter. The daughter enters the room to check on her, walking with that same lotus gait, that same swaying step, meaning each movement brings pain. She sits beside the bed and takes her mother's hand. Her hands, like her mother's, are soft from a lifetime of needlework, the only labor women with bound feet could perform. Neither speaks about it. Neither acknowledges the shared suffering connecting them across generations. What would be the point? The practice is ending, the world is changing, and dwelling on the past won't unbind feet or ease pain. So they simply hold hands, two women with broken feet, as evening light fades and another day ends. But this story speaks the words they couldn't say, acknowledges the suffering they had to hide, bears witness to the price paid for 3.5-inch silver lotus feet, because the pain mattered, the life mattered, and the fact that society called mutilation beautiful doesn't make it true. Foot binding ended, but its lessons remain urgent. About how beauty standards become tools of oppression, about how women can become complicit in their own subjugation when survival demands it, about how cultural practices persist for generations simply because no one questions them, about how love can become twisted when it requires hurting those you love to prepare them for a cruel world. The story ends here, in this room, as the sun sets on a practice that shaped millions of lives across 1,000 years. But the question it raises remains: how many golden lotuses exist in our world today? What practices do we participate in, enforce on our daughters, accept as normal, that future generations will look back on with horror? What pain have we learned to call beauty? If you found this story meaningful, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. History remembers emperors and wars, but rarely the millions of women who suffered in silence. By engaging with these stories, by refusing to let them be forgotten, we honor the lives of those who survived them.